Well, good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and call the Executive Committee meeting to order. Clerk, please take the roll.
Members, if you can please make the selections on your tablets. Chair, we have a quorum with 4 members present and 3 members absent.
Thank you. Just a note on the agenda this morning, we're going to reverse the order of items 5 and 6. So we're going to take item 6 before we take item 5 this morning. Let's go ahead and move to non-agenda public comment. This provides 2 minutes for anyone who would like to comment on something that is not on today's agenda, but is within the purview of the committee. Clerk, do we have any non-agenda public comment?
We have no public comments, Chair.
Okay, next is approval of the minutes of the March 19th, 2026 meeting of the Executive Committee. Clerk, do we have any public comment on the minutes?
We have no public comments.
Okay. Vice Chair Goebel, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
All right, I will second that motion. Do we have any discussion on the motion to approve the minutes of March 19th? Seeing none, clerk, please take the roll.
Members, if you can please make the selection on your tablets. The motion passes with 4 members present and 3 members absent.
Thank you, Clerk. Let's move on to our discussion items. Item 4 is a discussion of the fiscal year 2027 operating budget, and we're going to get the presentation from Gordon Meyer.
Good morning, Gordon Meyer, Manager of Financial Planning. So this morning we present our current draft of the FY27 operating budget. So before we get into the actual FY27 draft, I did want to give a reminder of our overall financial sustainability strategy at this time. So our goal is to balance our operating and capital budgets through fiscal year 2030 by using our existing one-time funding sources. So that 2030 target is important because it allows us enough time to pursue all available regional, state, and federal sources. And it also allows us enough time to pursue a revenue measure, whether that be a sales tax measure or other fee type revenues, such as through tourism or luxury vehicles. In addition, that 2030 date also allows us enough time to react if we're unsuccessful in identifying any of those other funding sources. So towards that strategy, the board has adopted a variety of different solutions. They're summarized at a very high level in the pie chart to the right, but we have received approval to use SB 125 non-recurring funds to balance our operating budget as long as those funds are available. We've also approved the continued shift of funding from our capital budget to the operations budget. For the next 4 years, that amounts to about $200 million or $50 million per year. And then we've also received approval for a variety of different operating budget savings strategies as well. One of those was the change to the pension amortization policy that was approved a couple months ago. So with everything that's been approved so far, we do still have about a $90 million gap to get through 2030 using our own devices. And so some of the levers that we still have at our disposal are we do have the FAIR study, which is currently underway. We received direction from the board in February of 2025 to work with our regional partners to explore what a fare increase would look like. So far, the feedback from that has overwhelmingly been that passengers support raising fares when given the option to either raise fares or cut service. That will be brought to the board next week for a full discussion, and then we'll also build our final passenger revenue forecast based on feedback from next week's meeting. Also underway is the Comprehensive Operational Analysis, or COA. So that was approved by the board in February of 2025. It's being conducted by TMD. They have already completed the existing conditions analysis, and the planning department is already using some of that data to implement service efficiencies in the short term. Specifically, some of that data was used for the January 2026 service changes, and then we're also planning on implementing some efficiencies in the upcoming June 2026 service change as well. That full COA process, which includes evaluating service increases if we receive a significant revenue source, or also guiding drastic cuts if we're unsuccessful, will be completed in fiscal year 2027. And then above all of this, kind of the overarching goal is that we always want as much service out on the street as possible. And so service changes really are the last resort when we're looking at this strategy. So shifting back to the actual FY27 budget. So we do build the budget using a zero-based budgeting process. So that's in comparison to a traditional historic budgeting process. So in a historic budgeting process, there's an automatic approval of existing line items, and then you're only receiving approval for the changes. In our zero-based budgeting process, each line item must be evaluated and reapproved each year. So in this presentation, we typically only talk about what's changing. So we'll be talking about FY27 versus the FY26 amended budget, but we have gone through every existing recurring line item as well and discussed those in detail. Our process began in January, so we met with all the departments, all the managers from each department. We reviewed their spending requests and also looked at the current trends. We had them discuss and also justify their requests. And then the finance department, we do all the personnel forecasting and also the revenue forecasting. And then ultimately we rolled those up. First, we did the mid-year amendment, which was approved by the board in March. And then we've been working on the FY27 budget as well. And so what you're seeing today is the first roll up and first draft of the proposed FY27 operating budget. Do want to note here that we are still finalizing some major assumptions, particularly we'll reflect the discussions of the FAIR study next week. We're also finalizing the position tables and personnel costs. Service levels, we are reflecting what we know right now and what our best estimate is of the scheduled hours, but the planning department is evaluating some other minor changes as well, which will be reflected in the final draft. And then energy, we always like to get the latest pricing available before we finalize that budget. So getting into the actual categories, the first major section that we'll look at is our operating revenues, and our primary operating revenue is FAIR revenue. And so as mentioned, the FAIR study is not reflected in this forecast, but we did put together a preliminary forecast of a baseline. And so in this high level assumption, we are assuming 2.8% growth for ridership over FY26. In this forecast, we are assuming a slight rebound in trolley ridership, which has been trailing year to date. And then we're also assuming continued growth on the fixed route bus side, where we have seen some growth consistently this year. Also, a reason for optimism and a reason we are building in growth is that the preliminary March ridership data is very positive, and so we are building that into our forecast as well. So in total, we're projecting 83.1 million passengers in this baseline forecast. For average fare, we're assuming $1. That's no change from FY26 because we don't have any of those external factors such as a change to fare enforcement, and we do not have a fare increase built into this draft either. So taking into account ridership and average fare, we're projecting about 83 million for FY27, and that would be a 2.7% increase over the FY26 budget. So in addition to passenger revenue, we also generate other operating revenues through our operations. And we have those broken down into the major categories in the table to the right. The first we'll look at is energy credits. So MTS generates energy credit revenue through two different programs. We have the low carbon fuel standard program, which is administered by the state, specifically CARB, and then the renewable identification number system program, which is a federal program administered by the EPA. And so typically One of the major drivers in our forecast for this line is the energy credit prices that we assume. And so for the LCFS, we are assuming $70 for FY27. It was recently $71 in February. It has come down a little bit in March, but at this time, in this draft, we are budgeting $70. And then on the RIN side, we're budgeting $2.30 per credit. That's essentially the average that we've seen of this year. And then it was $2.42 in February. The overall line for energy credits is increasing by 2.4 million, or almost 23%. Another factor besides credit price is that we are building in a full year of higher credit generation on our older substations. So prior to a programmatic change that went into effect in FY26, we generated about a third of the credits that on our older infrastructure as we do on our mid-coast substations. And due to that change, we now generate as many credits on our older infrastructure as we do on the mid-coast ones. And so we are reflecting a full year of that higher credit generation for the trolley side. Advertising revenue, we're budgeting $7.2 million in this draft for FY27. That's an increase of about $922,000. The main drivers of the increase here are that we have seen a significant increase in the revenue generation from the digital billboard in the gas lamp across from the convention center. And then we're also building in $397,000 to reflect some of the new initiatives that the marketing department is currently developing right now. And we'll go into those details on later slides. Real estate related revenues is budgeted just under $5 million. That's primarily our land lease revenue, but also includes the right of entry permits, which we increased this year to better recover some of those personnel costs. And then a major change here is in our budget for interest revenue. So the fourth line from the bottom. So here we are budgeting about a $4 million decrease from FY26. That's over a reduction of 50%. And that's primarily due to declining cash balances. So we no longer have stimulus funds. And then we're planning on using all of the operating deficit reserve in this current fiscal year 26. And so that will significantly decrease our interest that we're generating on that. And then we are also building in a rate decrease. We're assuming 3.5% in the first half of the year and then a 0.25% drop for the second half of the year. So in total, these other operating revenues are projected at $33 million, and which is essentially flat from FY26 due to that declining interest revenue. So as mentioned, the marketing department is currently working on some new initiatives. So we did want to run through those. We are looking at adding 4 vehicle wraps and including the Rapid 235 in our vehicle portfolio. This is scheduled to start in FY27, and we're expected to generate about $200,000 net annually for MTS. We're also looking at constructing a new billboard at Copley Park in Kearney Mesa. So this is currently under negotiation. This one isn't expected to be active until FY28, but it is something we're actively working on right now. So we did want to include it here. That one's fairly significant in that it would be expected to generate about $1 million net for MTS starting in fiscal year 28. The marketing department's also looking at increasing our digital kiosk network, specifically adding kiosks, which you can see in that bottom picture to the right, to new locations at 12th and Imperial, Convention Center, America Plaza, and Little Italy. That would be in FY27. And then in a later phase 2, we'd look to incorporate Snapdragon Stadium as well as UTC as well. In total, we'd expect to generate about 4.4 thousand per month per kiosk for those added kiosks. Additionally, the marketing department is looking at increasing our inventory from our trolley station ad panels from 60 to 100. Smaller impact, but it would be estimated to generate about 30,000 net for MTS per year, and that's expected to start about halfway through fiscal year 27. We're also looking at implementing a new concession kiosk at the Iris Avenue Transit Center. That would be expected to generate about 25,000 annually and is expected to start in fiscal year 27. And then one of the newer initiatives is that we're looking at implementing digital monitors on the interior of our light rail vehicles. So we're planning on breaking this into 3 phases, outfitting 50 to 60 cars per year for 3 years. And then once that's fully built out, we are estimating to generate about $275,000 per year for MTS. And then lastly, we are looking at launching an online MTS merchandise store as well. We're looking to have that up about halfway through FY27, and we'd be estimate to receive about $25,000 to $50,000 annually on that line as well. So in addition to talking about what's currently under development, we also want to do kind of a backwards look as well, leading all the way up to what we're budgeting for FY27. So this has all of our other operating revenues, excluding interest, because that's really outside of our control and it's an outlier that really skews these figures. But we have it broken down into advertising revenue, which is the blue bars, energy credits, which is the red bars, land management, which is primarily the lease revenue, and then other. So in general, you can see over time that this revenue has more than doubled over the last 10 years. Specifically, advertising revenue has also more than doubled. And then also worth noting here is that red bar, the energy credit revenue, has really become a significant source for us. And it's something we actively manage in terms of when to sell credits, purchasing supplemental recs to maximize our credit generation when we can, things of that nature. So, and then as always, the marketing department is continually looking for ways to maximize these other operating revenues. So that covers our operating revenues. The next section of the budget is subsidy revenue, and the first category is sales tax. So one of our primary sales tax revenues is Transnet. So that's the half-cent sales tax assessed in the San Diego region. It is administered by SANDAG, so they provide us with the forecast that we base our budgets on each year. For FY27, for the region, they're projecting $446 million. That does represent a 2.1% growth factor for FY27. Comparing that to kind of a historical growth, it's modest. We're typically around 3.1% historically looking at sales tax growth. But we are building our budget based on that $446 million regional total. So of the $446 million for the region, it gets split into a variety of different buckets. So the first is 33% goes to local system improvements, and that's to the county and city for roads. And then 42% goes to the major corridors program, which is for major capital projects. So that would be for things like when we implemented the new Mid-Coast and also the capital share for new bus rapid transit projects. 8.1% of the overall funding goes to new operations. So this is the piece that provides operations and maintenance reimbursement for Transnet funded ongoing operations. So for MTS specifically, that's to fund our ongoing operations for bus rapid transit routes, Superloop, and also our Mid-Coast service. So based on our projected expenses for those services, we're estimated to receive about $40 million in Transnet for cost recovery. And then lastly, about 17% goes to transit system improvements. So this is the piece that is distributed based on a formula. So based on the overall available revenues, we're projecting to receive about $49 million in FY27. Of that, $5.5 million gets taken off the top to provide discounts for senior, disabled, and youth passes. And then the remaining $43.1 million is available for bus and trolley operations. Next, we have Transportation Development Act. So this is a little different from Transnet in that it's statewide, and it's also a 1/4-cent sales tax. Once again, SANDAG provides MTS with the forecast and also apportions this each year. It is a little different than Transnet. So Transnet's received as the cash receipts are generated. For TDA, we file a claim in the beginning of the year, and then if the actual cash receipts exceed that claim forecast, that excess cash receipts goes to a reserve at the county and is available for future claims. If cash receipts trail that claim amount, then we draw from the reserve at the county to make sure that we receive that initial claim amount. So this does provide funding for both our operating budget and our CIP. For FY27, SANDAG is projecting $207.8 million for the region. And that represents a 1% regional growth assumption. So a fairly low growth assumption for FY27, especially when comparing to Transnet as well. And so based on the sharing, MTS is being apportioned 137.3 million. Based on our approved CIP and what we're assuming in the FY27 operating budget, we have 133 million going to operations and then only 3.8 million in the capital program. And that does reflect the board approved action to shift 50 million in TDA from the capital budget to the operating budget. So overall TDA for MTS increasing by 3.1 million. And that's reflected with a $27 million increase to the operating budget and a $24 million decrease to the CIP. Next, we have state transit assistance. So this revenue is derived from the state sales tax on diesel fuel, and it is a recurring formula fund that's based on both population as well as agency revenue. Historically, it is a relatively volatile funding source, so we don't put a ton of it in the operating budget. The state has in the past diverted it in order to meet their general fund obligations. And then furthermore, it's tied to diesel sales, which in general has been a declining commodity. So as mentioned, this can and is used for both our operating budgets and our capital budgets. We're expected in FY27 to receive 30 million in total, and we're putting 11.3 million of that into our operating budget, and then the remainder is in the capital budget. Moving on to federal revenues. So our primary source for federal revenues is the Federal Transit Administration, or FTA, and the funding for us, which comes through a variety of different formula programs, is authorized under the Surface Transportation Authorization. And so the most recent reauthorization was the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that was passed in 2021. That current legislation is set to expire at the end of September of this year, and so we will need reauthorization and continue to receive those funds. As far as expectations on whether it's going to increase, decrease, or stay the same, we really don't know. In our forecast right now, we're assuming it stays at status quo, but we're not building in any growth or decreases. Now, the federal formula funds that are available to us can be used for both capital or operating budgets. If it is used in the operating budget, it can only be used for preventive maintenance specifically, which essentially means any maintenance operating costs. And so generally, MTS does seek to use as much of the available federal funding in the operating budget for preventive maintenance as possible, and that is to maximize cash flow. So for instance, in FY27, we're budgeting $78 million in preventive maintenance. If we were to put that into a multi-year capital project, it would slow down the cash that we receive for that, because we wouldn't receive everything until that project was completed and the funding was reimbursed. And so by putting it in the operating budget, we incur a year of maintenance expenses. Those grants are awarded just about a month after the close of our fiscal year. And then we're able to submit a drawdown package almost immediately when those grants are awarded for that year's worth of maintenance expenses. And we're able to draw that funding and start generating interest on it. So overall, federal revenues in the operating budget are increasing by a little over $6 million. In addition to the preventive maintenance change that's mentioned, we do have some discretionary awards that are reflected in this figure as well. Specifically, we have $300,000 for the Otay Mesa Transit Study. And then we have $200,000 from a FEMA award for our security canine patrols as well. Next, we have SB 125 funding. So this was the $4 billion in state funding that was distributed to the transit agencies through the Transit and Intercity Rail Capital Program. So historically, this has been a discretionary or competitive program for major capital projects. But a few years ago, it was temporarily distributed through SB 125 as a formula fund, and it was also made available that you could use it for operations. And so we are expected to receive $237 million in total. We've received about $173 million of that to date. We are planning on receiving the rest of that, but there is always risk as the state goes through its budget balancing process that those could be at risk. But at this time, we are assuming that we will receive all of that. This funding source is very important to MTS right now because it is our balancing mechanism. So we budget all of our expenses, all of our other revenues, and then whatever that gap is right now, we're filling it with SB 125 funding to balance our budget. And so you can see the different activities that are funded in the table to the right. The major one here is the structural deficit balancing figure. So in the FY26 amended budget, we're assuming $3.5 million to balance the budget. And then that's increasing to almost $40 million in FY27. And that's primarily because we're using the rest of our operating deficit reserve in FY26. So we did not need to use as much SB 125 funding to balance this year's budget. But in FY27, there is no operating deficit reserve, so we will use more SB 125 funds. So in total, we're projecting about $50 million of SB 125 funding in this budget draft. Last slide on subsidy revenue. So we also receive revenue from SANDAG, which is fast track revenue from the I-15 managed lanes. So for FY27, we're including $1 million to fund the Route 280 and 290. That is down from $3 million in FY26 because SANDAG can provide MTS with fast track in lieu of higher Transnet reimbursement. And so they're providing less fast track in FY27, but that will be made up for with additional Transnet. So it's a net zero impact to our overall budget. So here you can see all of our revenues combined. So our operating revenues are projected at just under $117 million for FY27. That's a $2.2 million increase, or just under 2%. Subsidy revenue is projected at $364 million. That's almost a $76 million increase. And that is really due to the shifting of an additional $25 million in TDA from the capital budget to the operating budget. And then also that significant increase in the amount of SB 125 funding that we're using to balance this year's budget. And then on the reserve line there, you can see we're planning on using $68 million in FY26. That goes to essentially zero in FY27 because there won't be any funding in the operating deficit reserve left to use. And so you see that's negative $68 million change to the amount of reserves being used to balance the budget. So in total, revenues are projected at $481 million. That's an increase of about 2.1% from FY26. All right, so moving on to expenses. One of the major drivers of our overall expense budget is service levels. And so we have the estimated changes by mode on this slide. So on the rail side, we're planning for an increase of 1.3% in scheduled service. Also a note here, the planning department is currently evaluating the option to run 2-car trains during certain non-peak times, and it's on certain lines. That's not for certain yet, but if it is decided, then we'll reflect that in the next draft of the budget. On the fixed route bus side, we are building in a decrease of 2.7% in scheduled revenue miles, and that's reflecting the service efficiency changes that went into effect in the January service change, and then also some that are planned for the June 2026 change as well. This is still being finalized, but we do have our current best estimate reflected in this budget draft. On the paratransit side, this is a little different. We can't schedule that service because it's demand-based. And so we really come up with a forecast of what we think demand is going to do. And so we are forecasting about a 9% increase in billable revenue hours for FY27. Moving on to personnel costs. So we are presenting this a little differently than typically. We're breaking down the overall personnel costs into both represented and non-represented. And so first we'll take a look at the budget for represented employees. So as far as, I guess first, the pie chart to the right, it shows the breakdown of our overall workforce by representation. About 75% of our total workforce does fall into the represented category. And so in terms of budget assumptions for the wage rates, we have collective bargaining agreements in place for all of our unions. So that includes the ATU, the IBEW, SMART, and the TEOA. In all of these agreements in FY27, the different groups will receive a 4% increase at different points throughout the fiscal year. And that is after receiving substantial raises in the first year of all of the current agreements. So in the year one of all of these new agreements, the wage increases varied from 7% to over 12% for some of the bus operators. And in these current agreements, there are no annual raises that are under 4%. So we do just want to clarify that there are no wage freezes, and that every year there will be at least a 4% increase. As far as from a budget perspective, the annualized increase for the TEO employees, which is our code compliance inspectors, will be a little higher than 4% because they did just receive a 7% increase in February of 2026, and that will be followed by an additional 4% increase in March of 2027. So overall represented wages are increasing by 3.3 million, or just under 4%. That's under 4% because it does reflect some of the changes to the overall service level hours that are being reflected. As far as fringe benefits goes, the big change here is in pension costs. So the budget for represented pension cost is decreasing by 3 million. That is only due to the fact of the amortization change to the San Diego Transit defined benefit plan that was approved by the board a couple months ago. That reduces the payment that's necessary in FY27, but there is zero change to the actual employee benefits. Within fringe, the healthcare costs for represented employees are increasing by just under $1 million, or about 7%. So in total, these represented costs are projected at 137 million, or an increase of about 1.5%, with that decrease from the pension cost. Also wanted to note here that there are no current plans to lay off any of the frontline staff, and that we will be finalizing the hiring target with operations based on those final service levels once we have the exact final numbers from the planning department. And then with that, I'm going to pass off the next slides to Sharon.
So typically when we look at our budget year over year, we will usually look at our non-represented personnel expense and link it to the increases for the represented, which is currently we're looking at 4% at least for our represented employees. But the committee last month asked us to take a deeper dive on this particular expense in our budget. And so we worked together to come up with an idea to present to you today. Part of this is also explaining who is really included in this part of the staff budget. And when it's about 25%, but of the FTEs. But if you look at it, it's a lot of part-timers who are used during special events and things like that. It's also admin staff. It's various supervisors within frontline supervisors in the bus operations, maintenance supervisors, training, safety specialists, customer support. Most of our call center is unrepresented, management and administrative staff at the bus side of the house. Then on the rail side, it's also frontline supervisors, maintenance supervisors, security, training, safety, passenger support representatives, and management and admin staff. And then if you look at the administrative departments, which are really closer to about 10% of the total number of employees, that's human resources. It's all of our finance people, accountants, controller, the IT department, who really maintains all of our signaling and all the other systems that we use, the fare collection, et cetera, marketing, planning, the legal department, finance, procurement, et cetera. So what we're proposing today is to make a zero expense growth for the non-represented employee category in fiscal year 27. So in other words, it'll have the same expense as fiscal year 26's amended budget. And we're proposing this through multiple initiatives, but that would be, subject to discussion here today. As part of this, I would not be taking my own contractually designated increase in my own salary. But I did want to highlight this myself since it's responsive to discussions that were had at the last committee meeting. Can you go to the next slide? I wanted to showcase this because this is a study that recently came out. It was commissioned by San Francisco Muni in the Bay Area, and it was done by SPUR, which is an independent think tank. They compared 14 peer agencies looking at various metrics, but what we've shown you here today is this table that shows how lean our operation is, how cost efficient it is. If you look at MTS with regard to cost per hour, both bus and rail, we exceed all of the metrics for our peer agencies, and then for them combined as well. I wanted to raise this to you because we really are a lean agency. And so that's why personnel costs, whether represented or unrepresented, it's very challenging, especially in a market where cost of living is so high, to reduce this significantly. I'll move it back over to Gordon.
All right, so moving on to the budget for purchase transportation. So purchase transportation is our contracted bus service. And for us, these costs are made up of two different contracts. So we have our main fixed route contract, which is a TransDev contract for operating our service out of South Bay and East County. And then we have the other contract, which used to be First Transit, but was recently bought out by TransDev. And that's for our paratransit and minibus services, which are operated out of Copley Park in Kearney Mesa. So on the fixed route contract, the total costs are a function of our service levels, the fixed cost component, which is a monthly fee that's set by the contract provisions, and then a variable rate, which is an amount that we pay per unit of service operated. So on the main fixed route contract, we are projecting a decrease of about 2% in scheduled service. The fixed piece is increasing 3.1%, and then the variable rate is increasing by 2.9%. Reflecting all of that, that top line on the table, those contract expenses are projected to increase by 1.4 million or 1.6%. On the paratransit and minibus contract, the fixed component is increasing by 4.5%, and then the variable rate changes depending on the service. So for the minibus piece, it's increasing by 3.7% per unit of service. And then on the paratransit piece, the variable rate's increasing by only 1.8%. So mixing that with the projected service levels currently, the minibus costs are projected to remain relatively flat. And then the paratransit costs are projected at about $21 million, an increase of 2.2 million. And that's really due to the increase in demand that's being projected coupled with those rate increases. So overall, the purchase transportation is projected to make up about 115 million of our FY27 budget. Moving on to outside services. So we have our outside services broken into four main categories. On the security side, we are building in about $1 million of growth, or 6.8%. And that's because our current contract expires in December of 2026, so halfway through the fiscal year. We're not sure what that new pricing is going to look like, so we are building in a little bit of padding there, but we do hope to negotiate that down to a lower increase year over year. On the repair and maintenance side, we are decreasing the budget by 2.6 million, and that is almost entirely due to the budget for tie replacement. We had 3.8 million in the FY26 budget, and we're bringing that down to $1 million in FY27. Engines and transmissions, it's an overhaul when the engines need to be repaired. We're decreasing the budget there by 382,000 based on the current bus fleet and the projection from operations. And then lastly, other outside services are decreasing by 367,000. So we do have contract inflation built into these figures, but we have less one-time projects. So that's why we're seeing that number decline. So in total, outside services are projected about 59 million, a decrease of 2.3. And then I did list some of the major one-time projects that aren't our normal routine operations. Please feel free to ask any questions on those or if any of them stand out, and we can address those. Moving on to energy. So our two main energy categories are electricity, because it's used to power all of our light rail vehicle fleet, and then also compressed natural gas, which is still the primary source of powering our bus fleet. So on the electricity side, our overall costs are determined by the rate and our consumption. And the rate is made up of both the commodity piece and then the transmission and demand, which is through SDG&E. So we purchase our commodity through a third party, Calpine. We're very fortunate to be enrolled in a program called Direct Access. We were enrolled through a lottery program decades ago, but we save about 30% per year on the commodity price versus purchasing it directly from SDG&E. So even so, we are projecting an increase of about 9.4% in the commodity rate for FY27. And then for the SDG&E component, which is about 70% of the overall rate, we're forecasting a 10% increase in those costs. So we are forecasting 42 cents per kilowatt hour for FY27, which overall is about a 9.8% increase in the rate. Consumption, we're keeping flat at FY26 levels. We're not expecting any material changes there. Typically, we just expect the overall cost to be increasing by about 9.8%, but it's only increasing by 4.6% year over year, because FY26 did include a one-time $1.8 million catch-up payment that won't be recurring in FY27. For CNG, we also purchased a commodity through a third party, Clean Energy, and on this side, we're budgeting an 18% increase in the commodity price. We did build in a little bit of padding to reflect the uncertainty with the conflict in Iran. At the last meeting, we said that we were waiting to see the April index price, because that would give us a pretty good indicator of the impact so far. We received the April price, and it was one of the lowest commodity rates that we've paid in the last 5 years. So if anything, this number could probably come down a little bit, but I think just for the sake of covering our bases, we might leave it, but we will get the most current pricing data before we actually finalize this over the coming weeks. The SDG&E component of the rate, which is the transportation, is projected to increase by 2.2%. So in total, we're projecting $1.41 per therm. That's a 6.3% increase in the overall rate. We are bringing down the consumption forecast to reflect the decreases in service levels. And so that's about a 4% decrease, not all due to the service, but our forecast for this year was a little high. So we're tightening that up a little bit as well. So as far as the categories, electricity is increasing 1.5 million. And you can see the other changes there. The gas and propane line, you see a 22% increase on this line item because it's heavily tied to crude oil. We did throw in significant padding to reflect the conflict in Iran. So seeing how the couple of weeks ago, we might be able to bring this down a little bit, but it's probably safe at this point to include that extra budget there. So in total, energy costs for FY27 are projected at a little over 53 million, increasing 4.6% overall. Last slide on expenses, materials and supplies costs. So we are reflecting 600,000 in new spending for a credit card module upgrade on the ticket vending machines. And then we're also increasing the budget for the light rail vehicle drive unit overhauls from 2 million to 2.8 million. So overall materials and supplies costs are increasing by 1.4 million. On the risk management side, we're expecting an increase of about 1.6 million year over year. And that reflects the most recent premium estimates that we have, which is for our property and liability insurance. We're expecting about an 838,000 increase there. And then we're also increasing the budget for claims by 424,000. And that does include the partial payback of the insurance reserve that we plan on using in this current fiscal year FY26. So in total, these other expenses are projected at 48 million, increasing by 3.5 million, or about 8%. So here's the summary of all of our expenses. In total, we're projecting just under 481 million. That's an increase of almost 10 million, or 2.1% overall. Now, in order to, this shows our summarized view of our entire operating budget for FY27. So you can see our recurring revenues is projected at 381 million. Our expenses are projected at 481 million. So our structural deficit, which is our recurring revenues minus our expenses, is projected at just over $100 million. So that is a decrease in our structural deficit of 6.5 million from FY26. In order to get to a balanced budget, we need to include the one-time funding that we're using to balance. So we reflect the 50 million that's being shifted from the capital budget, and then the 50.2 million that's coming from SB 125. With those reflected, we do have a balanced budget for FY27. So on this slide, we did want to provide a preliminary 5-year forecast. And so here, the FY27 column is the exact budget that we just discussed. That's the starting place. And then we layer on economic assumptions, things like sales tax growth from Sandag, personnel cost growth, and general economic assumptions. It reflects status quo as what was presented in the FY27 budget. So it doesn't assume any major policy decisions or changes to headcount that haven't been discussed in the FY27 budget. And so based on this, we are projecting a structural deficit to grow over time to over 150 million by the end of FY 2031. Based on our available one-time funding, we're projecting to be able to balance completely through FY28, have a small balancing need in FY29, and then have the bigger gap in FY2030. And so this really highlights that $90 million gap. This is where that number came from that was discussed on the first slides. So in order to get through 29 and 30, we need to come up with an additional 90 million, either in additional revenue or expense reductions. And so in order to get there, we will continue to examine opportunities for additional funding sources. We'll continue seeking to maximize our other operating revenue, and then we'll also look for additional efficiencies in the operating budget as well. One of the major decision points coming down the pipeline is the FAIR study. So we will be recommending a phased package to the board. And then even if that is approved, it will not bridge the entire gap, as we'll see on the next slide. And then also the COA, as mentioned, is still underway. We'll get the full analysis in FY27. Our goal is still to hold service levels consistent as long as we can, but to continue to look for service efficiencies in the short term. So here you can see a preliminary 5-year forecast. It's the same as the other that we just saw on the other slide, except it reflects a preliminary estimate of what the fare change could look like. And with this, you see that we'd be able to get through fiscal year 29 completely, but we'd still have about a $40 million projected gap in FY 2030. So even if the fare change is selected or moved forward with, we will still have work to do. And then I did want to mention here that this overall, the financial picture is not significantly different from what we've been discussing over the last year or two. We don't have any major shortfalls or anything, so it is relatively in line with what we've been discussing. And last slide. So next steps, we will continue to finalize all of the FY27 assumptions. We'll get the feedback from next week's fare study discussion and build that into the passenger revenue forecast. We'll also receive final scheduled service from the planning department and reflect that appropriately in the expense line items and revenue. We'll finalize the personnel budget and then also take one last look at energy as well. For the next meeting, we'll also bring the full budget book attachments, update the 5-year with the final FY27 budget, and then we'll present that to the EC on May 7th, and then we hope to hold the public hearing on May 14th. And And actually those dates are a week early. So the EC is on May 14th and the public hearing on May 21st. Correction there. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Meyer. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do currently have one. Christopher, if you can please unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I just wanted to I wanted to call on behalf of myself. I'm a homeowner, business owner, taxpayer of San Diego, and a lifelong resident. I'm calling on behalf of an employee who desires to remain anonymous in fear of retaliation. As the board considers the 2027 budget, I want to share that the comments made by Patricia Dillard and others at last month's board meeting have driven employee morale to the floor. What this foolish woman, who never seems to understand the material in front of her, fails to realize is that the majority of admin staff are not high earners. In fact, most are earning under $80,000 a year. So her proposal to freeze their wages will further limit their ability to afford basic necessities in this economy. She also fails to realize that MTS needs a stable workforce to get through this challenge, and her proposal could result in countless employees leaving the agency with their institutional knowledge. She is not a leader MTS needs now and should resign from her MTS post effective immediately. I also want to address Sean Alo Rivera, whose policies are costing myself, San Diegans, more money each day. First, he started with the trash collection fee, then Balboa Park parking fees, and now he wants to freeze MTS wages. His own policies, of course, are no consequence to his life because he's living comfortably with his $180,000 salary, which is subsidized by taxpayers. How dare you castigate MTS employees when the city's budget is in far worse condition? Maybe you should propose wage freezes and cuts in your own staff. What a joke of a self-proclaimed pro-working class politician. He should also resign from MTS effective immediately. Lastly, I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to listen to my comments, and please show your workers.
Your time has expired. Chair, we have two additional comments. Sarah Ochoa, if you can please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Sarah Ochoa, Chula Vista resident. Hello, Chair Whitburn and board. And I really want to express my appreciation for the staff report and all the doing more with less that staff and everyone involved is trying to do and the stated value of service cuts being a last resort. So many San Diegans rely on public transportation, and folks, as everyone knows, we're just struggling to get milk for our kids and do the basics. And the potential of raising transit fares or cutting service, it should be an absolute last resort. So thank you for everything you're doing as you consider your options. I just want to state that historically in San Diego, throughout the region, public transit has been treated as like almost like something to be disparaged, as well as the ridership. And if you look at the Transnet allocations that were on the slide earlier today, I think it was slide number 11, it's like less than a third of that revenue is for transit, right? So those of you who also sit on Sandag, that might be one additional pocket of money, is to try to shift that allocation. I know it's really complicated, but when we have people driving electric cars that maybe pay a one-time fee that go to roads infrastructure, and then the rest of the system expenses, roads plus transit, are put on the poorest of the poor San Diegans, that's not equitable. So I just encourage you all to look at other responsibilities you have regionally and how you might creatively come up with funding gaps. And I will gladly support any revenue measures that come forward. Thank you so much.
Minola Clark Manson, if you can please unmute yourself.
Thank you for giving me the time to speak. I Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me the time to speak. I would like to reiterate some of the things that Sarah said. The people who ride the bus right now are people who often cannot afford any shifts in fees. So I agree that if you can keep up the routes, especially the routes that are just recently added, plus think as the last resort, raising the fees, because the other added part is that our economy is not increasing and getting better. So there are going to be the need for more people to ride the bus, but that also means that there may be people who will drop off being able to ride the bus if fees increase. That is all I'd like to say. Please consider it, and thank you very much for taking the time for me to speak.
Chair, that concludes public comments.
Thank you very much, Clerk. We will now open committee member discussion on this item. This is an opportunity for the executive committee to provide comments to staff on the proposed budget. We will begin the discussion with Director Dillard.
Thank you, Chair. Based on what I brought up at the Board of Directors meeting last month, I would like to make a modification to the 2027 budget. I'd like to move to ask the Board of Directors and the Chief Executive Officers to modify the implementation for the fiscal year 27 merit-based salary increase for non-represented, non-union employees as follows. Lump sum in lieu of base increase in place of the previous authorized 4% merit-based salary increase, eligible employees shall receive a one-time lump sum payment equal to 4% of their respective annual pre-tax base salary. Eligible criteria would be for the lump sum payment, full-time salaried non-represented employees and employees who have completed 1 full year of service or more of the date of this motion. Under exclusion criteria, the following classifications shall be excluded from eligibility, which is redundant with what was stated here. This morning, the Chief Executive Officer and the Chief Operating Officer, any full-time salaried non-represented employee with an annual pre-tax base salary of $200,000 or greater is in calendar year 2025. For the non-pensionable or non-compounding, the lump sum payment shall not be added to the base salary, not be pensionable, not be used in the circulation of figure wage increases, overtime rates, or salary-based benefits. Payment timing, the suggestion is the lump sum payment shall be issued on or about the Thanksgiving holiday in fiscal year 27 on a schedule determined by the Chief Financial Officer to align with operational and cash flow considerations. Reporting requirements, the staff shall report back to the board within 90 days of implementation with the total fiscal impact, comparative savings versus the original proposed compounding salary increase, and any observed workforce or retention impacts. For me, the rationale of this suggestion is by excluding higher compensation classifications, this policy ensures limited public resources are directed towards employees where financial support has the greatest marginal impact. The one-year service requirement prioritizes investment in experienced personnel, supports workforce stability, having lump sum paid towards the end of 27 further offsets against any alleged mass exodus of talented managers. This approach delivers immediate financial recognition while avoiding long-term compounding salary obligations and associated benefit cost escalation. This will save nearly $4 million on a flat base over 5 years. That is my motion.
Thank you, Director Dillard.
Thank you.
Any further discussion by the Executive Committee? Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. I've got some questions on some of the slides, if you don't mind. Let's go back to slides. Well, let's talk about the gas prices for a second. You said ridership is up in March. Could that be because gas has risen quite a bit, that people are now tipped into taking public transit? Is there a discussion about that?
I would definitely assume that it's related to gas prices, but I don't have any data or anything to support that specifically. And it's still preliminary data too, so it's not the final numbers, but we're seeing a pretty significant increase on both trolley and bus. So I'd assume that it's related to gas prices.
And I remember that I think when gas crossed $5 a gallon for the first time, maybe 4 years ago or so, we saw a surge during that time period as well. So I don't know how long we can count on a surge. Hopefully gas prices come back down. Slide 17, I just need some help understanding the negative number in the reserve, the negative 92. My accounting brain says when you use 67,981 million in reserves, that's a use of funds. A negative number tells me we're putting it back into reserves, but I'm missing something there. Can you explain the negative number?
Yeah, so your thinking is correct. So the negative number, what's left since we don't have the operating deficit reserve is a combination of two self-funded reserves. So for us, we have the San Diego and Arizona Eastern Department, which is fully self-funded. And then we have the for-hire vehicle administration for administering taxis and whatnot. So those two combined is a contribution of 92 million to the reserves. Specifically, it's the reserve on the SD&AE side. We're using reserves in the for-hire vehicle administration to balance their budget, but on the SD&AE side, we are planning to have excess revenues over expenses.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Slide 20, please. So this is the unrepresented group, and it looks like more than half are bus operations, rail operations people. My question is, if the goal is zero growth, there's a couple ways to do that. Sometimes you have an increase in one area and you have savings in another. An example could be you give increases in wages in one area, but you reduce the number of positions. Do you have a thought of how you would achieve the zero expense growth?
Not to get into specifics, there's a lot of different methods you can do that, and it would be tiered.
Understood.
We already discussed at the last board meeting freezing positions, but there's also other position changes that could occur. And then there's the idea of tiering based on operational need. So, for instance, we can't have compression in the supervisory positions for frontline employees, because then we're not going to be able to get people to step up to supervision because they're giving up the opportunity to get, overtime. So, and they've taken on the added responsibility of having the supervision as well. So we would want I, as the CEO, would want to have the flexibility to take into account the operational needs as we go through and make our target goal of the budget. And basically, we would execute the budget number using all these factors combined to make that.
Sounds good. And so that we all understand compression, because that's kind of an industry word. Let's say a bus operator makes $35 an hour, but a bus operations person makes $39 an hour for some reason. I don't know the exact numbers. And that bus operator is covered by a collective bargaining agreement. So their $35 goes up according to whatever the wage increase is, 4%, 7%, whatever. That would shrink the gap between that bus operator and the bus supervisor in this sense, providing less incentive, you're saying, to become a supervisor because it's not as much of a spread or it's not as big of a jump for a promotion as it used to be. Am I getting that right in everyday language? Okay, sounds good. Before I come back to this, let's go to slide 23. The contracted security costs. I kind of someday would like to see what our security per 1,000 passengers is versus other agencies around us. There's a sense sometimes that we see people see security guards standing around talking to each other at stations rather than actually spreading out and doing things. So I don't have a good sense if we're heavy per 1,000 passengers. I think it would be a good metric. Or not. So someday I'd like to see a measurement of our security. That it's a very expensive contract. And so I think we need more information on that. Let's come back to the unrepresented employees cost in slide 20. I appreciate my colleagues' interest and certainly is a bona fide proposal. One of the things that I've heard though is lump sum non-PERSable awards are not approved by CalPERS. They don't like non-PERSable stipends. It needs to be pay. It needs to be wages. It can't be a non-PERSable lump sum kind of a thing. That's what I'm told in other agencies. So I don't know that that will pass legal muster. I come back to we're a team. And especially looking at this particular graph, more than half the team are not administrative level positions. We're a team. It just seems unusual, almost just, it's not good for organization to say this group of people gets raises, but this group of people doesn't. And we're a team. Everybody pulls together to do things. We invest millions of dollars in preventive maintenance, we call these buses and trolleys assets. And every night we clean them, we repair them, we do preventive maintenance because we consider them an asset and we have to get the most life and value out of that asset. We need to especially view our human assets in the same way of investment rather than an expense, a one-time expense, a consumable. So I think we have to consider this entire organization as one team. And in that sense, I don't support the motion. I do think we need to consider the entire group a team. Everybody contributes in their own way, especially more than half of people here in this graph who would be looking at no raise when inflation in San Diego is 4% and maybe even higher lately because of the gas and things. I think we need a pool of at least 3% for the CEO to manage, to say, you know, some will be higher, some will be lower. That's up to you. But I think we need a 3% at least pool wage increase for this group. And that's important that we consider this organization as a team. We all work together.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. Let's go to Director Moreno.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation once again. Regarding the, I'm going to go here. Regarding the Otay Mesa study, first of all, thank you. Shifting gears a little bit. That was the grant that MTS staff was able to get, right?
Correct. And the total award is actually 500,000, but we plan on spending 300,000 in FY27 and then the remainder in FY28.
Wonderful. And who's doing the study?
That I don't know. I'd have to defer to.
We haven't done the procurement on that yet. So we still have to go and do an RFP process to select that vendor.
Okay.
But
And
the
what-
lead planner is Beverly Neff.
Okay, Beverly Neff. And when is that planning to go out?
I think you've already got the scope of work and
I'm sorry, I don't think the mic.
It's just
picked
going
you
to
up. Yeah.
procurement right now, and the project should start in October. So.
Project will start in October. Okay, well, thank you for that. One of the things, thank you. This was, I think, a very robust conversation, as it should be. I would reiterate to the chair that I think we do need a budget committee just to be able to flesh out a lot of these details, or as we like to say, this is the making of the sausage, which transparency is always, a good thing. And I think that it would be better served in a budget committee. So that's my pitch for the chair. I want to bring up, I went to the I went to the Sandag board retreat representing MTS. And at that board retreat, Mario Orso brought in, mentioned something that I think is relevant to MTS, and I think the board should know this. The Transnet ordinance flow of funds is what he brought up. So Transnet funding, for the most part, can't be moved around, right? There's numbers, there's funding that cannot be moved. He did highlight, though, that under major corridor capital funds, that those are malleable. And he quickly mentioned and specifically mentioned that these funds can potentially be utilized for MTS and NCTD, but it would require board action. And I would push for this agency and also this board to make all the moves we possibly can to be able to get major corridor capital funds. It will be, I think, a heavy lift, but considering what you guys are looking at for 2030, it warrants our efforts. What else? Regarding the motion on the floor, I have tremendous respect for Council Member Dillard. My concern with the motion is that I don't understand it. So if I could get a copy of the motion or have the motion be put on the monitor, I think that would greatly help. I do appreciate Vice Chair Goebel and what he mentioned. I too have tremendous respect for administration. I just mentioned the Otay Mesa transit study, and it's not lost who we are in who MTS is in a national scale, and the fact that Sharon is leading the way. I also want to point out that Sharon is paid less than the NCTD chair, which is a lot smaller than MTS. And that really, it bothers me. I will say that. I agree with Councilmember Goebel that if there is, I would like to, we have an executive director, and I would like for the executive director to have the ability to give raises where the executive director warrants the raises to be given. I do not want to get into the mix of who gets what. That's me personal as a board member. And I too agree that I think it will, what is the word that I'm looking for? We have a lot of qualified staff here all across the board in MTS, highly qualified staff. And I think, and I would presume that these highly qualified staff are potentially being poached by other agencies across the nation. I recognize that San Diego is a very expensive place to live. And so I'm feeling a little discomfort with the discussion that we're having here, but discomfort, in my opinion, is good. So absolutely would like to have the discussion, but that's my a natural reaction to the motion on the floor. But with that being said, I am open and I would like to see the details. So I think I'm done. Thank you, though.
Thank you, Director Moreno. Let's go to Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp.
Thank you so much, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. There's so much work that goes into this, and I truly appreciate it. So considering we have different studies and community and stakeholder feedback reports coming that will inform the board's decisions on the budget, the community input from outreach on the COA, the FAIR study that will inform the budget. I do want to put out there another idea for an additional revenue generating option in the form of land value capture strategies. I know you've gone back and forth a little bit with my staff on this, but I think right now, certainly an all hands on deck effort and as much information as possible will be helpful for us looking at this fiscal cliff that we are facing. So, assessment districts, enhanced infrastructure financing districts. I think this, if I don't recall us necessarily having any deep or detailed conversations about those strategies here. So I would just like to see that. And I know I'm not necessarily asking for a little bit more evaluation before this budget is approved, but maybe mid-year budget adjustments that come to this board September, October timeframe, if that is accurate.
Yeah, so that a lot of those suggestions and ideas came out of the Transit Transformation Task Force report. And so that most of those ideas will require some kind of legislative action at the state in order to authorize.
Well, what I would
us
like
do
to,
those things.
I think that we all agree that the task force didn't necessarily dig into the detail, do what it could have done. Now, if there's a place on the agenda for us to focus specifically on those strategies based on what the task force has provided for us, I would like to have a full discussion about that. But I do, and if it comes to an evaluation where we would have to advocate to our state legislators for something like that, just those options alone is all I'm looking for in sort of an evaluation. I wouldn't want to, put that into a motion or make those types of decisions without having all the information. But I know that there are other transit agencies in California that have taken advantage of those types of strategies. And I just would like to see that as well. I think on the motion, just my feedback is when I would also like an opportunity to absorb the actual proposal a little bit more. It had a lot of meat in it. And I'm not prepared today to say yay or nay on it just because there's a lot there. But I do want to kind of give my opinion, sort of bird's eye view, is that we have continued to discuss increasing fares on a population that is probably more vulnerable population. Our Title, Title VI reports show that this is a lower income community that are not choice riders, right? That are holding up our system. And we have no problem at all saying we have to go in and think about increasing fares. Of course, that is something all transit agencies have to continue to consider. Nothing wrong with that. But I think the sentiment of the motion is that if there are folks capped above a certain amount, right, that at least consider what that looks like. Not saying that, again, I would need more information, more analysis, all of that good stuff. But I think the sentiment of it is that we just have to look at all options, especially when we're going to people who don't make a quarter of what we're looking at based on this motion, and saying fares have to be increased. right? And so that's really what I get out of it. And that's why I want to continue to have the discussion. I just don't have enough to put it into or make an actual budget decision on it today. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Steppe. Let's go to Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. Good food for thought. Thank you. If we do a 3% pool, what kind of money are we talking about? What's the size of that?
It's approximately $500,000 per percent. So that'd be about $1.5 million pool.
I think we can come up with $1.5 million out of a $400+ million budget to make sure that we treat everybody equally in a sense of value and things like that. So my direction would be to come back to the full board with a option. We'll just call it an option at this point. We've seen the proposal, but I think the full board should see an option, including the cost of a pool of, I'll say 3% for the unrepresented staff, and then let the board vote on which option they like. I think that's a good way to look at it. Regarding the fare increase, absolutely. This is every penny counts to people who, in this economy, we're just seeing everything just go out of control with costs and things. And on top of that, even this agency is talking about needing a 0.5-cent sales tax, and sales tax is one of the hardest increases on people who are at lower income. And if we're talking a 0.5 cent for this agency, and Sandag's talking needing a full cent, and other agencies are talking needing this, and by the time we're done, we're up to 2 to 3% increases in sales tax that hit the lower incomes the hardest. So I'm very aware of every dime that we ask for from this group is very difficult. I do understand that, appreciate that, I acknowledge that.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. Let's go to Director Elo Rivera.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Gordon, for the presentation and the work on this. So there was a few questions that were kind of answered during the presentation that was helpful, but just kind of to reiterate here, as things currently stand, the 2027 operating budget does not include a fare increase. That's correct?
Correct.
And does not include service reductions.
It includes service efficiency improvements. So they're doing minor tweaks here and there.
Right.
But we're all discussed in the statistics.
Appreciate that. And I also appreciate the slides about non-fare revenue and the progress that's being made there. That's super important. What's kind of next on that front? Like, what is the thing that you're not comfortable including in this year's budget, but you are, if anything, optimistic could come online during the next fiscal year?
So I can speak to that to some extent. So we're working on a number of fronts. One is at the state.
Yeah.
Trying to get a proposal together that perhaps could impact future budgets. And that's really to address what happens in 2030. Mm-hmm. If our strategy to get to 2030 before we hit that fiscal cliff is met. Now, we also are in discussions with Sandag about the Transnet ordinance, and I was really pleased to hear a number of members of that board really focused on the transit operations and how we could improve that. At the state level, there's also a conversation going on about use of GGRF funds. The governor has proposed a budget. The state legislature is looking at how those funds might be better served to help public transportation. So there's some of that conversation going on as well. We don't know what's going to happen with the Surface Transportation Act in the federal side of the House. The administration's proposal is a non-starter, I think, for most of the legislature. It has a significant cut to public transportation funding. And so those are the kinds of things that we're keeping an eye on that are external to MTS, but that we can try to influence. And then we are bringing the fare study to the board next week to discuss what the board wants to do policy-wise with that. And then and that's not factored into this FY27 budget. All this is in a cloud of uncertainty that we are trying to budget for, the mandatory have a balanced budget by July 1st of this year. But there's a lot of things, moving parts that we're not going to know about for, quite some time. And so it could be that we come back to you in September to amend the budget early. It could be that, there was a year during the pandemic when I think we budgeted and passed the budget in May. And then we came back to you, what was it, July, to amend the budget. So there's a lot of things that can move and have a change. The one thing in the fare study that we're looking at is phasing it so that in the event that some of these other things come forward, we wouldn't have to implement phase 2, for instance. So a modest increase in first phase, which clearly a lot of people won't be able to, it will always impact them heavily, but it'll be more modest than what we were trying to get to bridge that $90 million gap that we have in our strategy right now to try to get to 2030 before we hit that fiscal cliff. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. I think to kind of echo what Supervisor Montgomery Stepp said, for a really important part of this is for me to be able to look riders in the eye and say we did everything we could do, like literally on a person-to-person basis. Like you are someone who depends on this system. You are stretched thin, and any fare increase is going to impact your life. I understand that, and we did everything that we could do to minimize that increase or prevent it. That's the standard that I am trying to apply to how we're moving forward. So with that, kind of pivoting to the motion that was made and the conversation that we're having, and I'll just say that before I get to that, then that's why the non-fare revenue is so important to me. We've exhausted our options, right? We've done everything that we could do. We've tried to squeeze every drop of juice out of our revenue opportunities that don't have an impact on riders, and this is the situation that we're in. And then the another part of that equation is how we are approaching expenses within the agency. One quick note: ad hominem attacks on my colleagues are never persuasive to me. I just want to make sure that that's clear. So if there's an issue with a proposal, this is just general advice to anyone who wants to be an advocate to MTS. You're going to lose me if you attack my colleagues for being foolish or call them other names. That being said, I think it's important to clarify at least where I was at. It's the same thing. It's the same thing that I was just saying about non-fare revenue. I need to be able to tell our riders that we've done everything we could to avoid them feeling additional burdens. And of course, that same logic applies to folks within this agency who are barely getting by. And I recognize fully that in San Diego, there are a lot of people who are barely getting by. And so just speaking for myself, last month, when I was talking about this part of the conversation, it was about folks at the top end of our ladder and making sure that we are examining and really thinking about the costs and benefits of providing increases to salaries at those higher ends, while we're having a conversation about potentially increasing fares, while we're talking about inevitably the folks who are making less in this agency will feel the impacts of a tough budget. So the part of the motion that was made about essentially freezing raises above $200,000, I think it's a fair thing to ask. And Member Goble, I think what you put forward, I'm hearing you there. I'm kind of trying to read where the board is at right now based on the conversation that we're having, and this idea of having options presented. I think there was a very complex motion made, but it was thorough. It was thoughtful, and so perhaps another way of approaching this would be to have both of these options presented to the board, so that we have time to digest them. Staff has time to analyze them. We can digest them with a little more detail in front of us, but not discard them, not discard either one at this stage in the budget making process. So we've got a motion, Chair. I don't know how there's no second to that. So I don't know, Member Dillard, if you would be open to kind of including what Member Goble said as one of the options, and then rather than your recommendation as a direction, but perhaps bringing that forward to the board as an option as well. There's like an A and B there, and I don't know if staff would have a C.
I would just request, it was a pretty detailed motion, and so it would be helpful if we would be allowed to talk to Councilmember Dillard offline, make sure that we get the details so that when staff presents it to the board, we're accurately reflecting, what that proposal is, and we might need to have a little bit of dialogue with Director Dillard, to the extent that our analysis doesn't align with what her monetary estimate of savings was. I just want to make
For sure.
so that we're all presenting kind of accurate information.
So maybe option one would be we could ask the board be presented with option one, which is Member Dillard's recommendation, and just kind of leave it at that with you all to get all those details. Option two being Member Goble's recommendation, and then any other options that the MTS staff thinks is important to put in front of the board.
Well, we don't need to bring it right to the board. We could bring it back to this committee next month. There's no, it was a very detailed representation, and we have to get the agenda for next week out by Monday.
Yeah.
So I would rather have the time to really digest what the proposal is. But I will say this from the perspective of the CEO, I understand more about what's happening in the operation on a day-to-day, very nuanced, very intricate level. And as your CEO, I, try to bring that to you so that you understand the decision-making that we're doing. I'm asking that I get to manage to the budget that you provide so that I can make those very nuanced decisions. I certainly respect and already expected to have a difference from the people at the top tier, which is 10 people in our organization who are making 200 or more, than those people who are making the far lower amounts. And for me, it's all about what will support the service operation. So I need line supervisors. I need customer support people. All these people need to have a way to live without having to leave MTS.
Of course.
So that's what I'm asking for, is that rather than get into the nitty gritty of those things, you allow me as your CEO to use my expertise and the expertise of the chief operating officers as well to really figure out what does the operation need.
Chair, I appreciate that. And I think there's again, speaking just for myself, recognizing that the majority of the folks who are included in that pie chart are people who they're just like everyday San Diegans who you can make what San Diego right now, you can make what we would all have considered very good money for our entire lives and still barely be making it. And if you've got kids and any of them are in childcare, it's even more difficult. All of that is very real. And at some point, our understanding of that seemed to have been lost in our communication last month. And to any MTS staff member who heard me at least being dismissive of that, I apologize because that certainly was not my intent. It's literally the opposite. It's ensuring that if you fall into that category, either as an MTS employee or as a writer, that we have done everything that we can to make sure that you are not feeling the impacts of any budget decisions we have to make. So Sharon, to your point, I think in bringing forward options, that one of them is, maximum flexibility for the CEO, and you can explain all the reasons why. That's important. Maybe this ends up being a hybrid of some of what Member Dillard has proposed and some of how you all are presenting it to us. But again, like what I'll just come back to, and I know I've taken quite a bit of time here, so thank you, Chair. I need to be able to look people in the eye and say, we tried everything we can. And I don't typically respond directly to like public comment, but our salaries at the city of San Diego are set by a ballot measure. So we don't have the flexibility to like pull the lever to freeze our salaries. My guess is that would have happened already. There was a reform years ago before I was in office that set our salaries, like all that happened. So this isn't trying to talk out of both sides of my mouth. It's wanting to be able to look everyday people in the eye and say, we tried everything we could to avoid you having to pay more or you having to earn less in the future. So I'll end there. Appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Elo Rivera. Let's go back to Director Dillard.
I want to thank everyone for their comments. There's a lot to balance here. I think that I'm happy to work with staff to go through why I made this motion. And it wasn't because I want anyone to be without. I just think that overall, I'm thinking about the ridership, and like Director Elo Rivera stated, we have to be able to look our riders in the face and tell them that we did everything that we could do, because we are talking about, we already know that there's over 60% of our ridership that is underserved. It's just a fact. And, I'm a bottom line person. I want us to be fully accountable for being so out of whack and so in debt. And I know at this particular point, I don't feel comfortable in relying on federal or state funding. I'm very worried about the support that could come there. I'm sure that there's going to be something, but the fact that we don't know is still lingers in my mind. And I just want to make sure that I am advocating for ridership, and that we're not just saying, oh, well, let's just raise the rates for ridership, and that's our accountability. And I know that ridership only provides, about 25% of the revenue for MTS, and that we need to be able to share with the public that we're making sacrifices that are also included in the fact that we're going to ask them to have more pain. And there is a really close line. We have a lot of people that you talked about, Director Goebel, that every penny counts. And there's more and more of us that every penny is counting. And I understand that as well. I'm just trying to look for a way to get to the end. And when I first came here, I had no idea why we were in so much debt. And I know that our CEO has been working very hard to try to bring that down, but I'm wondering how much can we twist and turn our finance department into continuing to do that. And I do appreciate our executives and their professional abilities. And I don't want to mitigate that at all. I just know that there has to be a balance, and we don't want to just put it all on the ridership to make that happen without being able to say to them that we've done all that we can do. So I think that that's just my sentiments, Chair. I'm happy to go through my proposed modification and find a happy medium. I want to work with the staff, and I want my colleagues to be satisfied that we've gone through everything we need to go through to help MTS and ultimately help the people that we serve. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Dillard. Let's go to Director Fernandez.
All right, thank you. I'm going to keep us on this item for just a little bit longer, so bear with me. Thank you for the detailed report, as always, Gordon. And I want to thank Director Dillard for a very detailed and well thought out motion. I support the spirit of the motion, and I too want to see it in print. I also support Director Moreno's suggestion for a budget committee. She's mentioned it a couple of times right now, and especially facing this kind of deficit, I believe that we need to have a budget committee, at least until we get a handle on it. And I typically don't respond to public comment as well, but when you talk about morale, I think of people and how you all feel, how everybody feels, right? And of course, when you talk about freezing wages or people taking cuts, of course, that's going to affect morale. I get it. But when you're talking about considering raising fares and the public sees that, well, how does that affect their morale? Or as a relatively newly elected official, when I sit down in this seat for the first time and, hey, you've got a structural deficit of 100 million to fix. I mean, how's that for morale, right? And all that to say, what Mr. Goebel said, what Director Goebel said is we're a team. We're all in this together. And we're in this together to have these kind of difficult discussions. And I appreciate Sharon for what you just said about, having this difficult discussion with us, recognizing that there, I guess, are two handfuls of folks in here that make a lot more money than everybody else in the organization. And coming up with creative ways to show that we're all willing to tighten the belt together. For those of you that don't know me, I've spent 25 plus years in education, the largest secondary district in the state. And some years back, they found a structural deficit of about 8% of the whole budget. That led to about 300 employees being fired. And those that remained were told, you're going to take a couple of furlough days. But executive management, again, a couple handfuls of people said, we're going to take 7 furlough days. And while that hurts a little bit more in, raw number, it doesn't hurt when you're making $250K a year in education. Again, all that to say, we are part of a team, but some of us wear suits and some of us wear uniforms. And so being creative and considering how we can all show that we're willing to tighten the belt is important, in my opinion, when we talk about morale of everybody, especially our ridership. So I just want to say that I want to see, I'm curious when we're going to see Director Dillard's motion in print. We had said next month. Is that enough timing to still make it into the 27 budget?
Yeah, the budget doesn't need to be approved before July 1st.
Okay. All right. So thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you very much, Director Fernandez. Very good discussion. I hear every single one of the members of this executive committee centering our riders in this discussion. And I think that is exactly right. For our riders to most benefit from the service that MTS provides, they need the best operators. They need the best mechanics. They need the best administrators. And I believe they need the best managers. If it were the case that our structural deficit were in some way due to the shortcomings of our staff, I think there might be a different conversation. But I don't, the way I see it, see that to be the case. We are very dependent in this agency on state and federal funding. One of the reasons that we don't have more revenue is because we have worked so hard to keep fares low. One of the reasons we have expenses is because we've worked so hard to keep service high. Our staff is not the cause of this. Our staff, including our top managers, all of our staff, are who we need to effectuate a solution to the budget challenges this agency faces. I would not want to support a blanket decision to not give any raise at all to some of our top managers. Freezing pay isn't going to solve this. In fact, depending on the impact on staff, it could hinder us. It is because of our staff that MTS has increased service. It is because of our staff that customer service scores are up. It is because of our staff that we are building housing on surplus lands that this agency had, something that everybody here has supported and is enthusiastic about and proud of. And some of the people who do that incredibly complex work of working to build housing that we so much need in our region, those are jobs. I don't know what they make. They might make more than $200,000. I have no idea, but I want them to feel appreciated. I want them to keep doing that. The same way I want every staff member in this agency to feel appreciated and keep doing the good work that they're doing. It includes the financial team. I don't know what our financial team makes, but they are critical to our success. And we have spent an enormous amount of time looking at creative ways to try to address the budget challenges that we face. And there's a lot that goes into that, a lot of expertise and experience and knowledge. I want them to keep doing that. So I very much appreciate the ideas that are being brought forward. I support the idea of bringing multiple options back for this committee to discuss in more detail, whether it is what the CEO initially suggested, holding the budget line for unrepresented employees, even with where we are at FY26, or whether it is doing something more along the lines of what Director Dillard suggested, or more along the lines of what Vice Chair Goebel suggested, or any of the colleagues here. But personally, when I make a decision, I am going to center the riders, but part of centering the riders for me includes making every single one of our employees feel valued. Thank you very much for this very good decision. We will look forward to continuing this at the next executive committee meeting. And with that, we're going to move on to the next item in our agenda, which is going to be item 6. We reversed the order of items 5 and 6. So let us go to item 6, because that is an action item. It is the East Street Affordable Component Transit Oriented Development Project, Disposition and Development Agreement. And we are going to get that report from Karen Landers. So feel free to get settled in and begin your presentation whenever you're ready.
Hopefully this is a good news presentation and harder or a little bit of an easier decision. But I will walk you through it. This is our latest disposition and development agreement for an affordable housing project. And it relates to a project that we have partnered with the city of Chula Vista on for about 8 years. It's been going on for quite a while. It's down at our East Street trolley station, which happens to be next door to city of Chula Vista, about 6-acre parcel. I think it's a former public works yard. And so we've been partnering with them since 2018 to put together a joint TOD request for proposals where we wanted a unified design and a kind of with a circulation with a mix of uses. So it wasn't just an MTS parcel and the city parcel. We really wanted to kind of look at and plan uses that maximize this whole city block. And we also were looking for a higher density than we might get at other locations because of the proximity to the Chula Vista Bayfront redevelopment area. This is one of the E Street and H Street are the two transit centers that kind of are on the edges of that redevelopment area and the closest access point. And then one of MTS's goal in our policy 18 is to create vibrant transit-oriented communities that offer a range of housing types, job opportunities, and services centered around public transit facilities. So our goal was to do this joint RFP with the city and get a project that was very dynamic and dense. We were in the middle of reviewing proposals in late 2019 when the legislature adopted AB 1486 relating to the Surplus Land Act. And I'll have another slide on that in a minute, but we had to take a pause to figure out how we could continue with this joint project, in light of the Surplus Land Act. We were able to get through that and entered into an exclusive negotiating agreement with Bayview Point development team at the end of 2022. And we've been working hard since then to really put the details into each of these proposals. And right now today is for us to talk about the affordable housing component of that overall project. So just a quick thing on the Surplus Land Act, that is AB 1486 that in 2019 amended the Surplus Land Act to require public agencies to first offer property for development of affordable housing before they could proceed with sale or ground lease for other proposals. And it applied to any property that was not under contract by September 30th, 2019. And so on its language or plain language, it would have prevented MTS and Chula Vista from continuing to move forward and evaluating the project proposals that we had gotten under this joint TOD. So because of that, we turned to some of our legislative partners and put forward some bills. We tried to solve this in 2020, but I don't know if you all recall, there was a thing where all the bills got to the Senate and there were too many, and there was too many other issues with COVID and all of that they just timed out. They weren't able to take action on them. So it wasn't that there was objection to our bill that would have saved this. It just got lost in that last minute where a lot of bills failed. So we picked it back up in 2021 and got a bill passed, in the summer of 2021 that went into effect immediately. And then there have been subsequent amendments that just modified some of the deadlines in our first bill. So what that did is it created a surplus land act exception. It doesn't call out our project, but it was designed to fix our project, the MTS Chula Vista TOD. It allows us to move forward with a joint project footprint, and it just requires that the end result of that joint project has to have a minimum of 100 residential units. And whatever number of residential units the project ultimately has, 25% of them have to be affordable. And then they wanted us to have disposition and development agreements in place by December 31st, 2027. So again, as I said, we have been in an exclusive negotiating agreement with Bayview Point since November of 2022. And during that time, we've been negotiating various different project elements, including MTS's, transit requirements, how interior roads and driveways would need to circulate throughout the property, the affordable component. On the city parcel, they're looking at a hotel, market rate housing, commercial, parking, and other circulation. And then MTS will be focused on affordable housing, the transit center, parking and also circulation elements. So we're ready to move forward with that affordable component, which would be today's proposed action to send this to the board next week. And then the city of Chula Vista is still finalizing their deal terms with Bayview Point for the hotel project and the other components. They have to have it all in place no later than the end of 2027. I would expect that it'll be much sooner than that. They're just in kind of some of those final negotiation stages themselves. So this project would, the diagram on the screen is showing the layout of the parcel, and in red is the MTS property. And so right now we have our existing station. The affordable housing would be there on lot 1, and the proposal is that it would be 101 units. 100 of those would be affordable. There's always one market rate manager unit of a project of this size. And then they're going to have 105 parking stalls for residential. So with this project, we would fully satisfy the surplus land tax exemptions for our project, where we have a minimum of 100 units and at least 25% of them are affordable. Now, these are essentially 100% affordable. And then on the city side, they're looking at a hotel property on lot 6 that would have 300 rooms. It would be a companion and not a competitor to the Gaylord property. And it looks like that's an attractive thing, that the financing is viable for that project right now. And then they also are planning a market rate residential project on lot 4 and 5, which would be 300 units. And so then that under the surplus land exemption, there would be a total of about 400 units, and 100 of them would be affordable. And so that meets that 25% affordability requirement. And so it's really important for us to move forward with this affordable project, because that unlocks the other elements and makes them permissible under that Surplus Land Act exemption. Some of the other project components for the overall joint TOD would be some parks. You'll see there's a linear park lot D. That's a little bit temporary, just because one of the things that we've done throughout this last several years is we wanted to make sure that nothing about what is built on this will preclude MTS and the city from supporting a grade separation project at E Street and F Street in the future. And so we brought in the Sandag designers that have kind of been working on some of those to make sure that at least at a high level, we understood, construction wise, how do you achieve a grade separation and what we would need to do. And so we moved the footprint east for any buildings to make sure that those buildings would not compromise the ability to grade separate in the future. And what the current construction concept is that because we have to continually run transit while we're doing any grade separation project, we would actually move the tracks east, and we would lower and trench them. And so we would continue operating at the existing location. And then once the new tracks are built, then potentially the old tracks would be taken out if they're not used for freight instead. But unless and until that grade separation project happens, that extra space area would be developed as part of this project as a linear park. Then there also will be commercial. Lot E ultimately would be a 1-acre park. We looked at this site. MTS currently has 278 stalls, but according to our parking study, we need a minimum of 240 in the future. That's kind of current usage. And so that was one of the big requirements and asks that MTS requested about this joint TOD, is that this is a primary, commuter node for us, and we need to maintain that parking to maintain that transit use. And so the ultimate project needs to make sure that we still have a total of 240 parking spaces. Some of those will be in their existing location on that bus loop, and some of them will have to be placed somewhere else. Right now, and I'll go into it, the phasing plan is that while the hotel and the affordable housing project get developed, that you would put temporary parking spaces on that lot E as a surface thing. We also want to make sure parking wasn't put too far away of a walk from our transit center for our patrons. And then ultimately, when the market rate residential project gets constructed, part of that scope would be to build a parking garage on the MTS Transit Center. And then that would unlock the park parcel to be a park. So the project under consideration today is an affordable housing component. The requirement is in our exclusive negotiating agreement is with Bayview Point, but they then are bringing in additional developers for each of these components. And so they have partnered with Eden, who we've not done a project with yet, but is a well-established affordable housing developer and has a good success rate. And so we're happy to partner with a new affordable housing developer. The project would be 7 floors with 1 below-grade parking. As I said, 101 units, 176 bedrooms is the current plan. And the proposed DDA terms would be generally our standard affordable project terms, so a 99-year ground lease, an affordability covenant. We give them the flexibility because there's always changes that happen during design, that anything less than a 10% reduction in density doesn't count as a material change. Any increase in density does not count as a material change. I don't expect them to go below, because really to unlock the 300 unit market rate parcel they want to do, they need to keep this at a minimum of 100 units. So, but sometimes as you're designing things and you have fire code requirements and this or that, you know, like things have to get moved around. And then the rent formula is our 5% of net cash flow rent formula that we offer for affordable projects. And then the big thing for us is the transit parking replacement requirements. And so it's just between Eden, Bayview Point, and the city. At the end of the day, we won't close escrow on a ground lease for this unless and until we're shown irrevocable commitments to make sure that somebody is building us our parking so that we don't lose parking. And then our policy 18 requires that these projects be prevailing wage and have skilled labor requirements. I won't go through too much of this because I've already talked about it, but again, we want this to go first, both because it unlocks the rest of the development and makes it clear that we comply with the Surplus Land Act. And so there won't be any questions hovering over the project. We also want to bring this to the board now instead of as a package of the whole joint development, because this project is ready to apply for AHC funding, which is in May. And that really is that last element of where they see they can get this project funded and financed. If they don't, and it is a good viable project because it meets a lot of the criteria that you get a lot of extra points for. If they miss this round in May, then it's essentially they have to wait until 2027. So ultimately, normally our goal for these is an 18 to 24 month period for them to get their financing together and their plans through, and that this project would break ground in 2028. We're building into the DDA a deadline of 2031. I always like to have a little bit of a buffer because you never know what could happen with financing and other things. In this time, I think we probably need a little bit more time because Bayview Point needs to come in and construct the interior access roads first and that temporary parking before they break construction. So I think it's probably a 3-year time period before they start construction, most likely. And then I already talked to you about the parking and the exact way that they provide us the parking is not yet set. That would happen during the DDA design period, but our requirement is we have to be satisfied that at the end of the day, we will have a total of 240 spaces available at that transit center. And then phase 1B would be the hotel. We expect that deal to come fairly soon to the city so that then they can start working on that and then again, do some of those interior access roads. The city also will be negotiating an agreement before the 2027 deadline for the market rate hotel, but the market conditions for financing like a high density market rate residential are not good right now. So we're not anticipating that that would start construction like at the same time as the hotel or affordable housing. So with that, our recommendation is that the executive committee forward a recommendation to the board to authorize the CEO to execute the DDA and then take all actions necessary to fulfill our obligations under that DDA.
Very good. Thank you. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We have no public comments, Chair.
All right, we'll begin our board discussion with Director Fernandez.
All right, thank you so much for the presentation, Ms. Landers. Of course, I'm super excited to support this item. I think you showed on a slide, I've seen ideas floating around since like 17, 18 on this. I even saw like a really cool mock-up of the trolley going into the lobby of the hotel. Thought that was cool. But either way, these are the kind of projects that, you know, we should be doing, leveraging our assets and our land to provide housing near transit. So of course, I'm in support of this. And secretly, East Street is my favorite station. I live closest to Palomar. East Street, not in my district, but that's where I go when I ride here, games and such. So anywho's, with that, I'd love to recommend board approval for this agenda item.
All right, we've got a motion from Director Fernandez. Let's go to Director Moreno.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Having been raised in the South Bay, this is going to be an extreme, just a tremendous game changer. And congratulations to MTS and staff that has been working on this, and also to my colleague over here in the city of Chula Vista. Please send my regards. I've been a huge proponent of housing, whether it's in the city of San Diego or at MTS or anywhere really. We do have a housing crisis, so this is all amazing. And I do want to state that we do, the city of San Diego and District 8, we do have 2 projects that are by Eden, or they oversee the projects. I believe they own the projects, and they're just tremendous partners in the city. I've gone and done walkarounds and had a lot of community engagement within their facility. So kudos to them. Thank you for bringing up the grading separation with Sandag. That was absolutely one of my points that I wanted to make. I think the whole blue line needs to be graded. It needs to have grade separations. So I'm very happy to hear that. In regards to, I know this board has talked a lot about bathrooms, accessibility to bathrooms, and wondering, and I know there is a bathroom right now at this facility at the coffee shop, if I'm not mistaken. What is the plan for bathroom accessibility for this project?
I'll let Sean do it. We would continue the bathroom stage. So this is Sean Myott, our manager of real estate assets. He'll remember the exact details of the restroom more than I.
Yes, thank you, Sean Myott, manager of real estate assets. Yes, the restrooms are a component of this project. They will stay in place. The affordable lot 1 that's going first will not displace the coffee shop with the restrooms. So the restrooms will remain there. In the master plan, it is yet to be determined how exactly the restrooms work, but there are restrooms in this master plan that will be maintained by the developer.
Wonderful. And thank you for the consideration of the parking for our transit riders. I know that was a point of contention for the Palm Avenue, and I'm happy to see that you guys have addressed that. So with that, I'm happy to second the motion on the floor, and just congratulations to everybody. This is awesome.
Thank you, Director Moreno. Okay, we have a motion from Director Fernandez, a second from Director Moreno. I will echo the sentiment that this is terrific. Thank you for all the work that has gone into this. And clerk, please take the vote.
Members, if you can please make the selections on your tablets. Chair, the motion passes with 7 members of voting yes.
And I did neglect to acknowledge that David Graham, the city's director of economic development, is here in the room and has been very supportive of us throughout this whole project. And
fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for being with us this morning. All right, back to item 5. It's an informational item on the Baltimore Junction and Euclid Avenue planning study. Heather Furey and Brent Boyd are going to present this item.
Good morning, Heather Furey, Senior Director of Capital Projects at MTS. Back in 2022, MTS received a $750,000 FTA grant for planning studies along the Orange Line. This money was used specifically to study the Baltimore Junction and to look at a grade separation at Euclid Avenue. At Baltimore Junction, MTS owns some property. Right now we have a Y, which is the railroad connection that connects the tracks, both tracks as they head east. And if you added a Y, it would sort of close the triangle or allow the tracks to close in both directions. And we'll show an exhibit to show that. And then the second item we studied was taking a look at grade separating between the railroad and Euclid Avenue to come up with some different alternatives in that location. We'll start with Baltimore Junction here. It's a 5.5 acre parcel. Up in the drawing, you can see the green line kind of headed east and the orange line headed north and then turning east. This site is kind of a triangle. The orange line's at the north, green's to the north, orange is on the right-hand side, and then the Interstate 8 freeway is kind of the third leg of the triangle. We wanted to look at adding another track here to kind of close that triangle and to evaluate a passenger transfer station in this location, letting passengers move from the green to the orange line right here at the nexus of the two routes. In addition, we wanted to look at whether there would be any development opportunities remaining on the parcel. Over the years, we've been approached by developers, and we didn't really know what the long-term use of this site was. So this study kind of allowed us to figure out where we might go in the future. It's a flat site. We have a traction power substation there, some other equipment storage, and we currently have a private tenant that's leasing some property there. To the north of the green line, there's a 30-foot retaining wall. So there's a substantial grade difference on the north side of the site, and the south side over to Interstate 8 is about a 6-foot grade difference. The requirements for the design is to include the full Y, which is the kind of the third leg of the triangle. Any options had to remain within existing MTS property boundaries, primarily due to some of the complexities of the grade differences and the adjacent properties. We needed to be able to maintain freight service on the orange line. Our passenger platforms need to be 360 feet long, and any design concepts needed to meet our LRT design criteria. This picture here shows the full Y, which is shown in kind of a light pink color. And this diagram shows that it is possible to make this connection between the green and the orange line. It does require some speed restrictions because of the geometry and the elevation of the tracks in this area. The construction cost alone, without design or any of the other soft costs, would be 12 to 14 million in today's dollars, and would require reconstruction of some segments of both the green and the orange line, installation of new and modified railroad signaling equipment, and would need to provide an access road so that we could get to our existing traction power substation. And it would also impact our existing private tenant lease. In addition to kind of incorporating that Y or track work, the consultant looked at what opportunities would be remaining at the site for development. And we think there's approximately a 42,000 square foot area. The diagram shows maintenance of access roads for, or space for access roads so that MTS can get to the traction power substation, and then also provide a crane to get into that location in the future when that substation reaches its useful life. We try to replace those every 30 years to keep the system operating well. And the project would require some retaining walls to separate the site from the existing freeway, primarily to the south. So at this time, we don't foresee the need to invest in the track and the signaling modifications for the additional Y. However, we are using this study and the study results so that if we are approached by a developer, we can confidently provide an idea of what space would be available without precluding that track work in the future. And with that, I'll move on to the Euclid grade separation study. Euclid is a very busy transit center for us. And we have an existing roadway and the trolley freight tracks that cross right adjacent to the station. And a grade separation would eliminate the railroad crossing gates coming down and impacting personal vehicles traveling in the area. And this planning effort included agency staff from not just MTS, but Sandag and the City of San Diego also attended the workshops and working groups that we held. Euclid Transit Center is our busiest Orange Line station outside of downtown San Diego. We have 7 local bus routes and 1 express route operating from this station. The Orange Line trains operate at 15-minute headways, which means the railroad crossing gates come down about 8 times per hour. Daily traffic volumes in the area are about 21,000. And the biggest impact is at the AM peak, where the intersections or the roadway between Euclid Avenue and Market Street is operating at a level of service E, which is the lowest level of service. In addition, this location is in a FEMA floodplain area. There's a lot of blue on this map showing the floodway, 100-year floodplain, and even a 500-year floodplain. So a lot of blue running parallel to and then perpendicular to the railroad tracks, and certainly flowing over Euclid Avenue as it exists today. For this project, the design requirements were to maintain the intersection at both Market Street and Euclid Avenue. We wanted to grade separate Euclid, but Market is a very busy street, so that intersection needed to remain viable and working. The second was that any design or concept couldn't disrupt the flow of the Encanto Channel and Choyas Creek. We didn't want to cause any revisions to the flood maps. Revision to the flood map doesn't sound like a big deal, but typically when you're revising it, you're adding new impacts to other adjacent parcels. And those can be big impacts. We kind of all know the risks of water and flooding. So that was a second big component or requirement of the alternatives that we developed. The team came up with a total of 6 alternatives. 1 to raise the trolley and freight tracks, a second to just raise the trolley tracks. The third was to lower the tracks. The fourth was to raise Euclid Avenue. The fifth was to lower Euclid Avenue. And the sixth was a combination to partially raise and partially lower. Before delving any further, I'll let you know that all the options that included lowering something were eliminated because of the floodplain and the increasing the flood risk at the adjacent properties. So we basically had 3 viable alternatives. Alternative 1 is elevating both the freight and trolley tracks above Euclid Avenue. It would include reconstruction of the Euclid trolley station in an elevated configuration. We're showing here the executive drive station along the blue line as part of the Midcoast development. So the Euclid Avenue trolley station would be something similar to this. The railroad property immediately north of Euclid Avenue, immediately east of Euclid is very, very narrow. It's only 40 feet wide. And what this means is that the ability to rebuild the railroad tracks adjacent to or on top of the existing tracks, it just doesn't exist because of that real estate constraint. The team looked at maybe running a shoe fly or finding another alignment for the railroad to be used while it's temporarily under construction. And in this densely urban area, we just couldn't find anything. So construction for this alternative would require an extended trolley shutdown, probably about 3 years. And the construction cost, again, this is construction cost only, in today's dollars is estimated at about $176 million. The second alternative was to elevate the MTS tracks above Euclid and leave the freight tracks at grade. We would have to elevate the Euclid trolley station, similar to alternative 1. This concept would include an additional freight spur or some new track at grade so that the freight tracks would run parallel to the trolley as the trolley is becoming elevated, And then the freight would then go under the trolley tracks once sufficient height was achieved. Similar to the first alternative, the 40-foot right-of-way to the east of the station would require an extended shutdown for service during construction. So this concept is estimated to take slightly longer than 3 years, with a cost of about $220 million for construction. Alternative 3 was lowering, so that was eliminated. Looks at elevating Euclid Avenue above the railroad tracks. So the grade crossing would be closed to vehicular traffic, but signal gates would be installed so that pedestrians and cyclists could still get across the railroad tracks in this area. Because of the number of commercial driveways and residential driveways in the immediate cross streets, the concept would be to elevate 2 of the 4 lanes of Euclid. So you'd actually have sort of an express or through lanes, and then kind of a local traffic down at grade level. This concept would require 3 of the bus routes to be modified. Today they cross the grade crossing, and with the elevation changes of Euclid, making that turn out of the transit center would not be feasible. This work is estimated to take about 2 years at a construction cost of $35 million, and would not involve a long-term closure of the railroad during construction. There would probably be localized, maybe weekend shutdowns, but those would be certainly much less than a long-term closure. There's a number of ranking criteria and weighted results that were evaluated by the team, looking at the construction considerations, user experience, community support, maintenance and operations, and kind of property and utilities impacts. The diagram on the right, you can see that the weighting scores of these concepts, 160 to 180, they're all relatively similar. However, when cost was considered in that equation, alternative 4 really jumped out as the most advantageous. I think cost is a big piece of that, but also not requiring the long-term closure of the railroad as well went into that metric. So for next steps, I think a big piece of this study and analysis and the group consensus was that this evaluation was done primarily from an engineering viability or feasibility standpoint, and not a lot of community impact or stakeholder experience was incorporated, and that those types of things and a real public outreach effort would be required to continue any type of evaluation or move forward with this project. SANDAG is kicking off a regional assessment and prioritization of grade separations along the trolley, sprinter, and coaster lines. And they're scheduling to get started on that study this summer and can be complete by the fall of 2027. So we really see that as kind of the next steps for this particular project. Are there any questions on either one?
Thank you. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We have no public comments, Chair.
All right. With that, we will open committee member discussion on this item. This is an informational item, so no motion is necessary, and we will begin our discussion with Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Stepp.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation. Just really quick on the Euclid Avenue planning study, the alternatives. This obviously the cost is significant and very different between 1, 2, and 4. Certainly when all of the factors are taken into consideration, 4 kind of rises to the top. But I do believe that for community members that did participate or stakeholder groups, that the preference was alternative 1. Is that accurate, or is that?
I basically just have kind of the data of how it was all assembled at the end. I think that may certainly be a community preference, and I think that's where the real need for community input comes in as a next step for the project.
Okay, and then of course, you know, the budgetary consideration is huge. I'm just, you know, noting there may be kind of some differences. It's obviously if you have a $35 million project is opposed to $176 million and you're scoring based on that, you know, the alternative that this lower cost is going to shoot up regardless of all these other factors. So, but thank you. Looking forward to additional conversation in just one day, seeing that great separation one day.
Thank you, Chair Pro Tem Montgomery Steppe. Let's go to Director Dillard.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I'm just going to talk about the La Mesa side of this, and I'm excited to see this. I think that La Mesa would be very happy, and so thank you for that. I just wanted to add one more consideration, if possible. I would like to highlight the persistence of graffiti issue and affecting the west-facing sides of the commercial building along the tracks. The city of La Mesa has worked collaboratively with property owners and MTS for many years to address this issue, and I'm sure you're aware of it. And so our request is that for any future improvements that we consider or encourage inclusion of more effective long-term solutions for the graffiti abatement, such as the landscaping barrier or a landscaped barrier to be placed, which would help deter vandalism while improving the overall appearance of the corridor. I don't know if that's a consideration or would be a possibility, but we love the project.
Very good. Yeah, this is certainly in the very, very early stages. And I don't see why, you know, taking a look at things that kind of environmental improvements by design couldn't be incorporated into that.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Dillard. All right, that was an informational item, and our final discussion item this morning is also an informational item. Item 7 is an update on the real estate and joint development program, and we're going to get the update from Sean Myott.
Good morning. Thank you very much. My name is Sean Myott, Manager of Real Estate Assets. Okay, so this is an overall update for our joint development program. This is going to go back in time a little bit. So this will be interesting to see the history and how long MTS has been doing this, and also, you know, look at the projects that are currently ongoing. So we'll do this regionally. We'll start with the city of San Diego. We'll get the South Bay and then the eastern part of our territory. The blue stars are the joint developments that have been completed. They include 47th, Moreno Linda Vista, Encanto, Grantville, and Rancho Bernardo. The red stars are the locations that are under contract. This could be an exclusive negotiation agreement, a disposition of development agreement, or even a ground lease, but they have not been completed yet. And so these are the sites that we are have the most activity at the moment. And then the green sites are the opportunity sites. These are sites that we don't currently have a development partner with, but we are always looking for different opportunities here. There's sort of a reason for some of those is these have some significant transit center needs and or construction differences. So as well as, you know, the Riverwalk property is dependent all upon the Hines redevelopment of the Riverwalk golf course in Mission Valley. So we're landlocked and dependent on that. So these are things that will be in the future, and they have some challenges, but those are always opportunity sites. So blue is completed, red is, we're working on them right now, and green, we look forward to future opportunity. So this goes back, Creekside Apartment at 47th Street on the Orange Line. This is the first MTS joint development going back to 1987. This is an interesting property because it is about 2/3 of it is not on MTS property and 1/3 is on MTS property. So on the map on the left, you can see the red outline is the MTS property, and then the blue outline is the overall project, the overall Creekside complex project. It's generally low density, approximately 10 acres. The ground lease expires in 2039, and MTS and a new ownership are in lease negotiations. So you will hear more about that in the coming year or two. And this one generates $112,000 a year in rent as of 2025. This is MTS's second joint development at Marina Linda Vista. It's called the Arrive Mission Valley site. All the property you see in red between Linda Vista Road, Napa, and then north of the Marina Linda Vista trolley station, that's all MTS. So if you ever have been to the FedEx or the Pita Pit or the subway in this area, you have been on MTS property as part of a ground lease. So this has the magical combination of mixed use. You have residential in the bottom right, and then on Linda Vista and Napa, you have the commercial facing uses, as well as then transit on the south end. This brings in MTS $240,000 a year base rent plus an overage rent, which fluctuates from year to year. It's just approximately $100,000 a year. So there are 67 market rate housing apartment houses there, and 18 affordable. At our Encanto 62nd Street on the Orange Line, this is an 100% affordable complex. The red, once again, is MTS property. It has been ground leased out for this affordable housing development. And as you can see here, to anybody who does live or want to do a park and ride here, this does have transit parking here. As you can kind of see on the photo on the right, the Google Street View photo, there are transit parking spaces that are available to anybody who does want to use this as a park and ride. This is a 99-year ground lease, and the payment for this was a $1 million one-time payment in 2016, and then a $3.3 million promissory note due in 2073 plus interest. So there are not annual payments here. The payment was up front, and then this long future term payment here. This is Grantville, the Shoreline and Union Grantville joint development. Open in 2023-24 with Gray Star on the right. The market rate focused on student housing, and then on the left side, you can see the affordable affirmed housing Shoreline project with 126 homes. That also included a $1.4 million grant for landscaping and paint refresh. So that was a nice bonus to spruce up the trolley station there. It has been open since 2024, and due to the ground lease formula, we did not receive any rent in 2025. On the Union Grantville Gray Star developed parcel, this is a market rate development, opened in 2023, late summer, and we get approximately $566,000 in rent to MTS in 2025. And this also has 100 transit parking spaces in it. So if you do want to park and ride, this is available at the station. We have worked on increasing our signage here, as you can see in the bottom right. There's some more details about the timeline here. Last year, when I made this similar presentation, we reported that there was a 39% or approximately 440 additional persons that have take the trolley and the bus at this station between 2023 and 24, where we had a closed off construction site. So, and this increase is holding steady. So this is, the proof in the pudding that, putting in transit parking as well as residential is contributing to increased ridership. So this is our newest development at Rancho Bernardo. It's the Skyline development, once again with affirmed housing. We just had a ribbon cutting earlier this year. There's 100 homes, and this is a unique one. It has mixed use as well. It has 14,000 square feet in office space, which is built to suit for affirmed housing. So they will be moving in later this month, and that will be their new headquarters. Once again, there is transit parking at this location. There's the surface lot north, right next to the bus loop, and as well as inside of this building on the south of George Cook. So we've learned some lessons from Grantville. We've improved our signage and made it very clear that there is additional parking, 84 transit reserved spaces in this building here. This building will direct revenues to MTS will be approximately $31,000 per year for office rent. But the residential rent, due to that is an affordable housing, is estimated to be de minimis. We will see how that goes, but we're looking for, and so one of the more important things here, it's a little early to say this building is not even fully leased up yet, but we have started to see encouraging ridership signs. The March station ridership is up 9% year over year on, year over year ridership. So down below is right, we are sitting right now is the 12th and Imperial Transit Center. This is triggered by the 12th and Imperial Transit Center expansion project. It's a partnership with the San Diego Foundation. The board approved the DDA in October, and it consists of kind of two phases. The first phase has a development partner in Cypress Equity Investments, and they are doing the affordable section of this, approximately 160 homes and 280 bedrooms. Thank you. An AMI of 40 to 80%. The South project, the goal of this Southern project, we heard some comments before that we want to make sure from the board that we want to make sure that the site is as dense as possible. There still is a phase 2. We are still working on that with the San Diego Foundation. And the goal of that project in this phase 2 in the Southern part is to go for a missing middle income band and look at a very high density or 20 stories. But at the moment, we don't have a development. The San Diego Foundation does not have a direct development partner, but they are actively seeking folks there. Rent here is expected to be de minimis for the residential rent on the north side for Cypress Equities for the affordable, and the south phase is to be determined.
Hey, Sean, before you move on from that, I do want to kind of, the second to last bullet of significant utility challenges may require redesign. And that's kind of a big if on this project, because there is a City of San Diego stormwater channel that bisects this property like diagonally. And they had been in discussions with the city about potentially moving it or like about potentially building on top of it, but leaving like a ground floor parking so that you could access it that way. But it's been a pretty definitive no from the city on that issue. And so now we're in the process of evaluating like what the other options are of, do you have to redesign where you build around it? It seems like it might be infeasible to move it, but so that's kind of a pending issue. We're trying to exhaust all of our options before we come back to the board with having to do a different concept on this site, because we all want as much density as possible. So
thank you very much for that. And we've seen a lot of research done by and resources put forth by the San Diego Foundation here. So it's challenging, but they are doing their best, certainly. In southern San Diego at Meyer Boulevard is another project with affirmed housing with 100 homes, a DDA approved back in May of 2022. There will be surface parking for transit as well as parking for the residential. And with most of our affordable, the expected is de minimis residential rent. They have been facing challenges getting funding for this project. They have a San Diego Housing Commission voucher, which was recently extended. So they are looking to apply in May for a mixed income program. And hopefully they will get that and be able to combine that with the San Diego Housing Commission voucher extension to jump into construction. But with all affordable projects, it's a little bit of a wait and see, and there are less and less, the pie gets smaller and smaller, and the people, developments competing for that continue to remain the same. So we are hopeful and optimistic. Affirmed has been able to do a number of good developments with us so far, and so we have faith in them, but just wanted to highlight that challenge here. Palm Avenue Station. This is one of our larger joint developments, and this will be built out over approximately 10 years. National Core and Myott Infill is a development team. The DDA was amended in December 2023, which increased density. There's a childcare facility in phase 2. Transit patron restrooms in phase 1 to be owned, operated, and maintained by the developer. As you on the left side here is Palm on the picture on the bottom left, and that is phase 1. So right there, the long building will be the first phase. They have complete funding for that building. But right now, they are doing a lot of utility work out on Hollister right now. So if you have been through that area and noticed folks drilling on or around and under our property, that's what's going on there. They're bringing significant utilities further south, which will increase the potential density or make it easier for future developers to tie into these water and sewer lines. So that was a really great thing, not just for this project, but for the future of that neighborhood. And that was supported by a state infill and infrastructure grant. So they are doing that work right now. And we're expected, once again, on the rent side, de minimis rent for the residential rent for phases 1 through 3. And phase 4 is the middle income with Myott infill development. This will be the last site that'll be built out, depending on larger macroeconomic conditions for affordable or for housing. And that rent structure is to be determined. On the right, you can see the unit counts. There are some kind of very cool things that when phase 1 building is being built, it will look very different because they will have solar panels. It got a grant for solar panels on a microgrid. And so there will be solar panels around the entire exterior. So it'll have a very unique look, but it will be energy efficient, which should bring down operating costs as well as cost to residents. Moving to South Bay. So we have a little more, so you can see the opportunity sites are in green. That's H Street here. H Street has significant parking needs, as Karen noted in the E Street area. The southern blue line has a lot of park and ride usage. This is a small lot. It is always very full. And it also requires a surplus land act notice. So while we are always interested in developing this, there may be some significant challenges to any development, and MTS is also considering, the potential of, long-term holistic needs for, park and ride needs on the southern blue line. So we are always evaluating our parking needs, and this site may, be a logical site for a future parking garage, but we are continuing to study this and work on this. But that is the opportunity site, and you can see in red at 24th Street, we have a notice of interest from National Core and Myott. Karen went over the E Street development, so I won't spend too much time on it. But also Palomar, we're working with National Core and Myott again. But those are subject to staff from both the developer side and MTS side to get those projects up and moving. So they're in a little bit of a pause, but they are on our list of things to do, and we look forward to developing those sites in the future. I'm not going to spend probably any time here. I think everyone has saw Karen go through the East Street and Bayview Point, but we are very excited about it. Great mixed use project here. And then moving to East County, because I know we're short on time. The El Cajon Transit Center is a opportunity site. This is one of the larger MTS sites. It's a joint development partnership with the city of El Cajon. We have sites in La Mesa with Grossmont, 70th Spring Street, and Amaya. Some of those are already built out, which will go into the next. And then an opportunity site in Lemon Grove at Massachusetts Boulevard. So going back in time, this is a completed development, Grossmont, AKA the district, this was completed in 2010. And this has 447 market apartment homes with 80 affordable apartment homes. And you can see on the right, that is the MTS property next to Fletcher Parkway and at the Grossmont Trolley Station and bus transit center. This has a significant amount of parking, and MTS has used that parking since the parking demand for transit ridership does not fulfill the full 600 parking spaces that are there. We have leases with the local community and the neighbors to bring in non-fare revenue here. It's probably small dollars than what Gordon was talking about, but it's just another way to increase non-fare revenue here. This project does bring in, excuse me, approximately $300,000 a year in rent. So Spring Street is another exciting project. This one is under development right now. It's supposed to be 152 homes with 277 bedrooms. The DDA is executed, and we're looking to get to a ground lease and construction in June. And what you see here in red is sort of the pardon our dust nature of transit-oriented development, and that parking lot will be largely closed for about 24 months starting this summer. So we know the city of La Mesa. This parking space is used for Oktoberfest and for events at downtown at the Petco Park and the Snapdragon Stadium events. So MTS is working on a messaging plan with our marketing department to suggest alternative parking locations at the Grossmont and Massachusetts trolley stations. This also does include construction and maintenance of a transit patron restroom and bus driver break area. So there will be restrooms for our workers and a break room for our workers, as well as a transit patron restroom. Because this is affordable, we are expecting de minimis residential rent here. So once again, all of this, I know this is a big, quick flyover. A lot of this is online. This is the real estate properties page on MTS. It'll have the pull down menu for opportunity sites, completed sites, sites that are under negotiation. It has a one-page little PDF, which allows folks to get an idea of what is going on here. You can see a Myott trolley station there listed with an aerial photo, some basic site information. And in this particular location, if there are any development hurdles like utilities, it's noted here. So all of this information is online per board policy 18. So overall, we've expanded this overall spreadsheet to show, to add revenue in. What you see in green is the things that have had some recent updates. So the 47th Street of Creekside Apartments, those 44 units, those do exist, obviously. But we are working with the developer on a ground lease extension, so they are under negotiation. So we won't be adding another 44 here. So if the numbers don't completely add up, that's what's going on in one of the little bullet points there. You can see Palm, as I said, Palm is in the infrastructure phase, so they are under construction. They're not going vertical yet, but they are going to start construction inside the parking lot also later this summer. They'll work on the north side of the parking lot, leaving parking for the south side of the parking lot. But that's exciting to see them actually breaking ground and being on site. And the new Rancho Bernardo is one of the newer ones that moved to the completed with 100 completed units. And then in April, the office rent will start. And then the East Street Station, we have, as Karen mentioned earlier, the 101 units under a DDA. And then at 12th and Imperial, we're always working to try and increase. Those are some recent updates there. So with the 161, 160, but the takeaway the takeaway count here is overall on MTS properties, we have 2,555 units either in the pipeline or complete or constructed. There are 1,299 completed units that are on MTS property. And all of this in direct revenue brings us $1.3 million a year to MTS. It's hard to estimate the indirect revenue, but we have seen the ridership gains here. And yeah, so this is the large overall summary.
And obviously, we're being optimistic that the board will approve the East Street DDA next week. So we recognize that that's within the board's discretion.
Correct. Thank you. Yeah, one more week for that. And with that, I'm happy to take questions and comments.
Very good. Thank you. Clerk, do we have any public comment on this item?
We do not, Chair.
Okay. With that, we will begin our committee member discussion. This is an informational item, so no motion is necessary, and we'll start with Vice Chair Goebel.
Thank you, Chair. Sean, what is it about the El Cajon site that's just not getting across the finish line?
Some of it has to do with geography. For affordable housing, you get a lot of points on light-tech development when you're in a qualified census tract or a difficult to develop area. And these are set by complicated things, and the idea is to encourage development in areas that have either difficult or have some financial challenges. The El Cajon Transit Center does not sit in one of those, but just to the northwest, one block north and one west to the west, there is a qualified census tract. And that was something that Chelsea Investment Corporation, who was a former ENA partner on this, they were hoping for a change in the map. They did not see that.
And who changes that map?
The state.
The state. Okay, we've got some work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Goebel. Well, I will express my thanks for all the work that you've done on this. It's good to see this presentation and see all the transit-oriented development that we've done and that we're working on and that we have in the hopper. One of the biggest concerns that we hear from residents is the cost of living, particularly the cost of housing. Rents in our region are among the highest in the country, particularly when you look at the amount of people's income that they spend on rent, those who do rent. Fortunately, there were some media stories just earlier this week about the decline in rents that many people are seeing. Year over year rents in our region have declined an average of 5.6% for a 1-bedroom and 7.5% for a 2-bedroom. Those are average rent declines. And that corresponds with a 15% increase in active listings for apartments. San Diego had the second biggest rent declines in the nation, among the largest cities. And I'm really pleased that MTS is contributing to this by constructing housing, particularly affordable housing, near transit. It contributes affordable housing. It contributes more access to affordable transit for people who are taking advantage of that affordable housing. And the overall increase in supply is contributing to moderating rents and in some cases reducing rents in our region. So for the revenue benefits for the agency, for the ridership benefits for the agency, for the rent declines that we see in the region, this is just a really excellent program that we have, and I appreciate your leadership in advancing it. That was the last discussion item we have on that one. So let's go ahead and close things out by looking at next week's draft board agenda. If there are any questions on the draft agenda.
Based on today's discussion, I'm going to remove item 16, which is about the FY27 operating budget, instead bringing it directly back to this committee next month. And because of that, I had moved for, time constraints. I had moved a couple of items to May, and so I may bring them back for this agenda.
That sounds good. And that will give us more time in May to discuss the budget. Any other staff or committee member communications? Director Euler Rivera.
Thank you. Just as it relates to the agenda, we're item 17 on that. I think it's item 17 on the agenda for next month. To talk about the discussion about fares.
Item 17 is for next week.
Excuse me, for next week. Sorry about that. Next week. I just want to know, are we going to be asked to take action at that time?
Yes.
Okay. And I just to be the broken record, it's going to be incredibly important for me to know at that time whether and what we are doing to explore fair strategies related to major special events that are hosted in San Diego, such as the World Cup, the Olympics, how we're leveraging those events to bring visitors to the region and explore partnerships with corporations or event organizers to identify non-fair revenue. These are all things that I'd mentioned last month. We took action on September 11th that included exploration of non-fair revenue. I appreciated that being incorporated into the presentation about the fiscal year budget. I think it's very important that be part of the conversation about fare increases as well. I said a lot about why that's important to me. I just want to make sure that I'm being transparent, that if we're being asked to take action as it relates to fares, I'm going to need to be able to show my work to folks in order to be able to support an action like that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Director Elo Rivera. All right, seeing no further committee discussion, the Executive Committee's next meeting date will be May 14th at 9 o'clock in the morning. And with that, we are adjourned.